Hello, friends. I'm Abhinav Pandya, CEO and founder of Usanas Foundation. I'm really very happy to be here for our second Maharana Pratap Annual Geopolitics Dialogue 2023. And I extend a very heartfelt and warm welcome to all our eminent speakers and participants today. Also, keynote speaker Dr. Arvind Gupta, former Deputy NSA and Director of VIF, is also here as a keynote speaker. And we are really, really distinguished and honored to have such a bright strategic mind, one of the finest strategic minds of India, with us today here. Last year also, he gave us a keynote speech and special remarks in our Maharana Pratap Annual Security Dialogue. And today also he's here with us. So thank you, sir, for joining us, and all the delegates, Ambassador Sajjanhar, Ambassador Trignath, Ambassador Carmon, General Narayanan, and all the other delegates who are going to join us today. I'll just give a brief opening remarks and then we can start the session. Friends, we started functioning in June 2020 amidst the horrors of Corona pandemic. However, those difficult days taught us the importance of technology and online conferences. Over the last 2 years, we have organized roughly 62 webinars, including our first Maharana Pratap Annual Security Dialogue in 2022. We also organized a unique conference in Mumbai with Usanas Foundation on India's strategic thought processes, titled as RNET in World Order. We have published more than 300 write-ups, including articles, research papers, issue briefs, and reports. We are a new think tank trying to make a space in India's budding think tank ecosystem. In this, we try to promote original research and new ideas. In India, the think tank ecosystem is still in the age of infancy and mostly centered in Delhi. At Usanas Foundation, our objective is to take the strategic and foreign policy discourse beyond Delhi to the small cities of India, spread awareness, initiate dialogue, and help explore and rejuvenate India's strategic doctrines and culture. We like to promote young minds, including the enthusiasts from the smaller cities. Today, the world is at a stage from where we see the unleashing of new forces, trends, and processes in geopolitics. After the end of Cold War, it seemed the history ended. However, such thoughts were proven wrong soon as the world came face to face with the challenge of transnational terrorism. Across the globe, deadly terror groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Al-Shabaab, Hamas, and Harkat Network became active and posed a major challenge to human security and liberal values. 9/11 attacks shattered the dreamy American notions of living in a secure world far off from the global conflicts. However, the world was having its journey of American unipolar moment. No doubt, anti-American voices existed. However, the unipolar moment defined the decade of 2010. But over the last decade, with the rise of Chinese expansionism, Russian revisionism, and the resurgence of transnational terrorist groups like Taliban, ISIS, and then Corona pandemic, and finally the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it has sealed the fate of American unilateralism. Undoubtedly, it can be said that we are back in the age of state actors and wars between the nations. What goes on now between China and the US is often regarded as Cold War 2.0. However, things are starkly different and more alarming than the previous Cold War days. Today, China's aggressive designs on Taiwan, Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh, and in Japanese waters, intelligence and influence operations pose a great threat to the world peace. At the same time, terror groups like Taliban are ruling the country as a government, and ISIS ideology is spreading far and fast. With the Russian invasion, notion of European unity, prosperity, stability is also under test. Middle East witnesses rivalry between Iran and Israel, Iran and Saudis, in addition to the badlands and the terror-infested areas of Syria and Iraq. Some questions arise. Is the West declining? Is the world order changing? With the US supremacy and credibility severely threatened and questioned? In such a situation, what are the options and way ahead for India? Over the last decade, in India also things have changed fast. Finally, it seems India has come out of the stranglehold of a soft state image and shown strong determination and will to deal with security challenges and lead the world with its own vision and narrative. India gave a befitting reply to Pak-sponsored Fidaiin attack in Pulwama by air raids deep inside the Pakistani territory, abrogated Article 370, and launched massive crackdown on terrorist and radical groups like Jamaat-e-Islami and PFI. In foreign policy, India is showing a different attitude and an assertive face, not an aggressive face, but an assertive face, speaking eye to eye with the West on the major international issues. With China, India is dealing firmly. On Ukraine war, India has refused to toe the Western line and taken a principled stand. Its stand enabled it to become a peacemaker in the process. In the field of economy, Delhi is making fundamental changes. We have created world's one of the most advanced digital payment system. We are focusing on Make in India, infrastructure development. It seems in the emerging world order, India is ready to take the leadership. However, India's leadership model is not of hegemony, but of benevolent coexistence, which defines our values and our traditions. Here, I would also like to explore the idea of Indian strategic thought and traditions. We need to explore that the traditions of Kautilya, Shukracharya, Kamandak Nitisa, because to lead the world and to lead the world in a very positive manner and to spread our message, we need our own narrative and vision. Usanas, the word itself means Shukracharya. What I want to say is that we cannot understand and show our own way with the borrowed knowledge and theories. Hence, we need to decolonize our IR discourse and redefine terms. For example, the terms like nationalism, religion have very different connotations in India. In India, we word the use Rashtriya, which is very different from the European concept of nationalism. In the Europe, the word nation state basically defined similar language speaking people or an area following a similar religious practice. But in India, right from the ancient times, the concept of Rashtra included people belonging to different faiths, different culture, different languages, different religions, and different sects. They existed all peacefully. Ashoka's empire existed right from Bhagat Patliputra region to the parts of Iran in those early times, and from North Kashmir to Kanyakumari in those early times. That's why our concepts are very different. Likewise, in the field of religion, the word dharma has an altogether different connotation. It doesn't imply any particular sect. It doesn't imply any ideology. It is all about being righteous. It is all about following the right duty. Therefore, with all these redefinition and re-exploration of India's strategic thought and concerns, we also need to look at the standards and the norms and the definitions set by the existing world order or the previous regimes, the global regimes in the international institutions. And we need to ask questions about them. I'm not saying uprooting them, but definitely, certainly, we need to ask questions about them and present an alternative worldview. Because India has the concept of Dharm Vijay. India has a very rich civilization which goes back more than 5,000, 10,000 years. Therefore, we need to question those narratives and we need to propagate our own thought and traditions. In this conference, we bring the best strategic, security, and foreign policy minds. I'm not going to repeat the session details as they are in the brochure and the schedule. However, I believe that this conference will give an insight into the India's strategic subconsciousness and also help the world powers understand India. Here we tell the world how we understand and make sense of the geopolitical developments. Also, we communicate with the world community to facilitate a better understanding and work towards the fulfillment of free, fair, prosperous, and the peaceful world. Conference will be a delight for the IR buffs and very useful for IR scholars, armed forces people, the diplomatic community, and the intelligence professionals, and the corporate leaders also. After the conference, we'll give the participation certificate to all of you. The registrations are still open. Tomorrow also we have one more day for the online conference. And in the month of March, we'll have the offline conference from March 23rd to 25th, for which registrations are open, sessions are being planned. So here I end my opening remarks, although I said that they're going to be brief, but I guess, I have overshot my time. Okay, and now I'm going to invite Dr. Arvind Gupta, today's keynote speaker, to give his opening remarks, to give his special keynote address, and also inaugurate a book on terrorism. The book is the result of the papers presented in last year's conference on the Maharana Pratap Annual Security Dialogue. And I'll just give a brief introduction of Dr. Arvind Gupta. Dr. Arvind Gupta is the director of Vivekananda International Foundation. He was the Deputy National Security Advisor and Secretary, the National Security Council, Government of India during 2014-17. Earlier, he was Director General of the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, Ministry of Defense, during 2012 to 2014. A former career diplomat, he has served in the Ministry of External Affairs and Indian missions abroad. He speaks regularly at various Indian universities, military, paramilitary police, and diplomatic academies on foreign policy and national security issues. He has guided research students at premier education institutions. He is a member of the Board of Studies of the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University and has honorary academic positions at Punjab University and Andhra University. His book, How India Manages Its National Security, was published by Penguin in 2018. In 2020, Sage India published a co-edited book with Ambassador Anil Wadhwa titled India's Foreign Policy Surviving in a Turbulent World. He also co-edited with Arpita Mitra a volume titled Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Relevance of India's Ancient Inking into Contemporary Strategic Reality. Thank you. Ambassador Dr. Gupta, I invite you.
Thank you, Abhinav. Thank you very much for inviting me to the second annual Maharana Pratap Strategic Dialogue. I had the privilege of attending the last one as well, which was your first dialogue on terrorism. And I must say that it's always a pleasure to be with the participants who are well known and who contribute to the ongoing discourse on international relations. And I think a number of people that we met last year and a number of them this year have all deep knowledge about the developments and their impact, the recent developments and their impact. And I think you're focusing on international relations theory and also the need for questioning the assumptions of the IR theories, which are by and large guided by a realist paradigm, is very apt. And as you can see, in the last few years, and certainly I would say since the start of the Ukraine war, and since India became, assumed the presidency of G20, I think the focus on India narrative is now coming very sharply. And I think we should welcome this. And in this context, discussing these issues and also the concepts which are guiding India's foreign policy today is very useful. Of course, we are at the beginning of this process, and it will be a while before we can, coherently articulate the various concepts which are now coming up and which also become acceptable and which get to be discussed in various international events. So your seminar today is a very welcome step in that direction. So, as I think you sketched out the international situation and the developments very well, how the new world order is beginning to, become clearer. You talked about the decline of the West, etc. So I'll not go into that. I think that is well known to this audience here. What I want to really look at is how India is responding, both at the level of concepts and also in practical terms, to the various changes that are taking place. And how do we conceptualize these changes? How are we building a framework for our own policies while taking into account what is happening in the world? And of course, this is still early days, and we are probably the next 10 years are going to be very important, not only for the world, but also for India to develop its own narrative and also to implement some of, and also place our active actions in that framework, which is a new framework. And I think when Prime Minister Modi assumed the presidency of G20 and he gave this overarching theme, Vasudev Kutumbakam, which was, to my mind, a very bold decision that was taken. Firstly, nobody heard outside India of what is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So it was explained as a tagline that it is one earth, one family, and one future. So by bringing Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam at the global stage, and by explaining that this is the concept of one planet, one future for all of us in one family, I think he has started a debate which is worth having. And it also is a harbinger of a new kind of thinking in a world which is deeply conflicted, which is fragmenting, a lot of violence and conflict is taking place, and which is really a culmination of the failures of the policies that have been adopted by various countries, and which is actually in a way reflecting the crisis in multilateralism. So by bringing this theme of one family, I think he is forcing us to think that how do we deal with this world today. So some number of new ideas are coming, and very recently when the government of India and Prime Minister Modi held a virtual conference, and about 120 countries of Global South participated, and where some of these ideas were developed further. So what are the new trends that we are seeing in India's foreign policy as a result of these developments? Now, let us look at geopolitics first. Now, geopolitics, Russia-Ukraine war is a very big change. It's a landmark event, and it has triggered so many new trends. As you said, it's perhaps a return of the Cold War 2.0 in 21st century setting, and which is more dangerous than perhaps the last one. And I think all that is true. And when Russia-Ukraine war happened, everybody would have thought that perhaps, India, actually it was a very difficult moment for India. But at that point of time, and bucking the trends, of our going close to the West in the last few years, etc., India took a balanced position and refused to criticize Russia openly. And I think India came under pressure in the beginning, but now India's position is very well understood and appreciated by most countries. And it was very beautifully conceptualized by Prime Minister Modi when he was in Samarkand and he was talking to President Putin. And it was a public comment that this is not an era of wars. So today, if geopolitics is taking you towards conflict and perhaps a wider conflict, articulating that this is not an era of wars, I think it resonates with a large number of countries, probably all the countries, except for a few who are involved in this war almost directly. So that this is not an era of war is a sentiment which is shared by all, and I think this is has created a constituency for India. So I think that is one way how India is, trying to navigate the conflicted geopolitics of the today. And in this conference of the Voice of Global South, I was struck by one phrase which Jaishankar ji used. And he said that we need to take a middle path. The global South has to take a middle path. So when you talk about South, India is not going back to the era of non-alignment or the G77 or the leadership, etc., which posits it's in opposition to the North. No, I think that is not this global Voice of Global South conference says. What it means is that we have to take a middle path. The North, you talked about the weakening of the West, etc. But there was also this whole this feeling that this very highly centralized globalization, let me put it this way, which was a very skewed kind of a globalization, which created so many problems for so many of us. Now, how do we deal with these problems? You have to take some kind of a middle path. And as you know, in our own ancient thinking, strategic thinking, middle path comes very naturally to us. And we are able to navigate the extremes. So I think we are in that position when the world is now getting conflicted and perhaps fragmented, polarized, etc. The importance of middle path is going to be, has to be emphasized. And this is what the Global South Conference, I think, was done. So, and here there was a very important change which has now come about. I think when today India talks about in the Global South and also is a part of G20, which is dominated by which is really a club of 19 countries and another organization which have a huge GDP and constitute about 85% of the global GDP, etc. So India is that navigation is you on one hand you are with the very powerful countries sitting in G20, sitting in Quad, and so on, and you also are now representing or trying to collect the voice of the Global South and voicing their concerns in the most important, arguably the most important multilateral fora, that is the G20. So this navigation is starting, but the important point here is it's not that we have not articulated the concepts of the concerns of the developing countries in the past. We have, but here today India is a fifth largest economy in the world. It has demonstrated time and again its capabilities to come to the help of the countries who need it at a point. And I think the most recent is the Indian assistance to Turkey and Syria in this very difficult hours of for the people of these two countries who have suffered a very devastating earthquake. Within a matter of hours, a very large amount of aid and assistance has been provided, and our teams, I think 200 plus people are already there, and perhaps more will be going, and even people are getting involved in this. There are people, philanthropic organizations in Punjab and others who have already now getting active and providing. So India today, as a first responder to crisis, is one capability that India has developed, and it has been demonstrated from the days of 2004 tsunami to today. And maybe dozens of cases they are there. So I think India is today not only articulating the voice of the Global South, but is also today capable of strengthening the South-South cooperation that we have been talking for a very long time. And you mentioned, the digital payment system. I think in digital payments, in skills, in pharma, in computers, in so many other, in disaster relief, in so many areas, India today has demonstrated capabilities which have been used within the country, in our neighborhood, in the Indian Ocean, and on the continent, and so many other places. So today, I think there is India has had that credibility now that when it talks, when it can walk the talk. So I think this is what the change has come, and that's why the voice of Global South becomes a very important opportunity. The other, thing that India has been articulating, which is the need for, there's more and more multipolarity. Multipolarity is good, and it also is complex. Now, you cannot handle multipolarity today in the world unless you have a proper institutional reform. So India has been articulating the need for the reform of the UN Security Council and other UN institutions. And this has been done at various fora and consistently. And I think when we go to G20 and when we also have this voice of Global South, a lot of people whom we are now consulting widely about their own concerns and so on. So all this will ultimately, this effort will funnel into the effort to reform the multilateral institutions. They are in the crying, there is a crying need to reform these multilateral institutions. So a support from the South will be very important. That is why I think today we have not only this conference, of course, 2 days affair and so on, but the way India is approaching, say, Africa, and the way Africa has become important in India's foreign policy, that's just one example how India is mobilizing wider support for the reform of the multilateral institutions. Not only multilateral institutions, but also many regional institutions. India is a part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and now has a presidency. I think India has the opportunity to bring many of these new ideas and also to bring many of the capabilities that it has developed, which are now on offer, whether it is in the area of vaccine development, whether it is research and development, whether it is traditional medicine, holistic approach to health, disasters, the green energy, etc. These are vast capabilities that have been developed and which are on the offer. So India's participation in regional organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for instance, has also the potential of bringing in new energy to these organizations. And I think this is welcome because a lot of countries today, frankly, they don't want to take sides. They are more concerned today about their own issues, I know, which have been exaggerated and exacerbated by this Russia-Ukraine war. For instance, food, fertilizer, the crisis, the fuel crisis. They are all looking for solutions. And I think today India, by wider consultations and also by its own example, is today offering workable solutions for these problems and to all countries, whether they belong to this camp or that camp. Of course, today nobody is really fully in one camp or the other. But even if this polarization kind of takes place, but the solutions that India is offering are available to everyone else. So I think this aspect of sharing of experience and also this aspect of caring and sharing, which is deeply rooted in India's strategic culture. Now, these are the ideas which are being articulated and which are also being implemented. I think over the last few years, India has also, by very massive engagement that has taken place at the highest levels, from Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister and various others, engagement in various parts of the world and so on, I think we today have a better understanding of the global concerns, the concerns of the people who are vulnerable. I think that is what is now being articulated more and more. During the COVID, we saw the vaccine Maitri program, what we need to do in the health sector or education, skills, etc. Today, we have a far better understanding of these concerns. Now, one of the issues which our leaders have articulated in various fora is that these concerns are not heard in the highest councils in the world. And that is what I think this G20, I think India will be articulating these concerns in the G20 and coming up with the many solutions. Now look at, for instance, G20. Of course, a lot of G20's agenda is in a way set because a lot of, there is a continuity because every country comes up and tries its best to, steer the G20 and also present some solutions, etc. So in that sense, India is no exception. But the way India has handled the G20, it took upon itself to consult so widely and has made it almost a most important part of its G20 is to articulate the concerns of not only the G20 countries but outside those also. So I think as a result of this, several new areas that I think probably would be articulated in this G20, the contours of these are visible. And the last G20, although India was not the president at that time, but it was in a way rescued by a collective effort. and I think India did play a role, but this formulation of that this is not an era of wars that found reflection in the Bali Declaration, which itself showed that India was very active and it was able to rescue that, and we were able to, the Indonesian presidency was able to come out with a declaration. We will be facing similar challenges, I think, in September, because the Russia-Ukraine war is, going nowhere. In fact, the situation is becoming worse. So this challenge is there. But by reaching out to so many countries, there is a hope that India will be able to steer this, the challenges, and will be able to bring the G20 to a successful conclusion. But at the same time, I think some new ideas can come in. And one idea I think I would like to mention here. You see, there is a lot of mention of health in G20 declaration. But one specific aspect which we need to focus on, and this is my suggestion also to everyone, and which is the area of holistic health. Holistic health, the approaches, 80% of the world's population today is still practicing traditional medicine. And in our country, and you mentioned our narrative and you mentioned our strategic thinking, etc. But even on the practical side, look at the Ayurveda, for instance. Ayurveda is science of Ayu. Ayu means life. We are, and this is Ayurveda today, which is provides a meta framework for integrating many approaches to holistic health, and this holistic health finds resonance all over the world, whether it's in Africa, whether it is Asia, and so many other countries. So I think the G20 should look at and perhaps set up a working group on holistic health, where all countries can contribute, and perhaps India, because we have a very strong program in Ayush, which brings Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, homeopathy, naturopathy, yoga, and so many other approaches. And I think we can bring approaches from other parts of the world also. And so this working group, G20, which should be a permanent working group, it can start looking at holistic health approaches, which are more affordable, which are more integral, and which are perhaps more useful. So that is one area, for instance, I think we can look at it. Another area in G20 we should perhaps look at is this whole aspect of cybersecurity. You mentioned the digital and UPI and so on, but it's all very vulnerable to cybersecurity. I think another strong working group on cybersecurity should be set up under the G20, because what is happening is that in the international arena, the discussions on cybersecurity are not going anywhere. Despite the fact that UN had set up, UN Secretary General had set up this government group of experts on cybersecurity, and this last 2000, I think 5 or 6, so the 17 years have gone by. We still do not have an agreement on proper norms. And in fact, the approaches in cybersecurity are very much there. But today's cybersecurity has become so critical to the overall, stability in the world, and also to a digital economy, that I think there is a need for a part, just as we have a financial stability board which has been doing a lot of making some useful recommendations on economic security, financial stability, etc. But on cybersecurity, we should probably set up another working group. And a third area, I think, which again, from Indian point of view, will be very important, and also from the global south perspective, you see this whole issue of critical technologies, emerging technologies, green energy, etc. Everything is technology based. But the capabilities of most countries and technologies are very limited. And these are concentrated only in the developed countries. R&D is one issue, and we saw during the COVID, the vaccine, the IPR issue, how big it became. In fact, it has still not been resolved. The short point I'm making is, we need today in all parts of the world a development, capabilities in emerging technologies. And that will require R&D, skills, education, training. Why doesn't the G20 set up a big fund for promoting the skills and trainings in critical and emerging technologies so that this is available to everyone. So right now there are small funds here, small funds there, and they don't take anywhere. But I think G20 should endorse this idea of a global fund on capacity building, skills and training, etc. So this is something that I think India can also, because of its own experience, etc., take some lead. And it's not just giving an idea, but demonstrate by putting some, perhaps by contributing to these funds, and so that the G20 can, other countries can also get influenced. So there are many ideas like this, but I'll stop here by just saying that we need a narrative, no doubt about that. We need a narrative which is an alternative to the very realistic paradigm which has been, in operation for a very long time. Once we start thinking anew, then we will start looking at, probably come up with ideas how to reform these institutions. They have done useful work. One is not saying that the UN institutions have not done useful work, but I think how to renew them for the new world which is coming up. And I think the next 20-30 years, it's not going to be very easy. We have to work together, and we have to stand with each other. And I think caring and sharing, which is what Vasudev Kutumbakam, I think, underlines, and taking the world as a family, and also deeply believing that we are all facing one future, and there is no other planet for us to go by. So these ideas, I think, should be discussed, and they should be put on sound theoretical and conceptual footing in the IR research. And I think India should take lead in that as well. But more important, I think India has to demonstrate by deed, and so that these ideas can become India's credibility enhances. And today, India has the capability to do so. So thank you very much, Abhinav, for giving me this opportunity for talking to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It's always a delight listening to your thoughts, and it's always a great learning experience. Thank you very much, sir. I'll just request you to inaugurate our books. Preeti, can you share the PDF?
Yes, just give me a minute.
Yes. So you brought so many critical issues like this Ayurveda and cyber security. Definitely, I mean, it's a pleasure listening to you.
But I think it's a great idea that you are releasing this book on terrorism. India has described terrorism as the biggest security threat to international stability and cross-border terrorism as well. And although you held this last year, but in the second half of the last year, India focused a lot on terrorism. As you know, 3 conferences were held in India on terrorism. The Counter Terrorism Committee of the UN, those people came here and interacted with people here. Then there was this Interpol conference that was held here. And then there's No Money, No Terror. So the ideas that you discussed, in some sense, they got reflected in the very high profile and high level activities which were undertaken by the Indian government. So I congratulate you for focusing on this subject. And I think you are one of the foremost experts on terrorism. You have done so much work on it. And we hope that our focus on this issue will continue.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. In fact, I would really like to thank you and Vivekananda International Foundation for that matter, because I distinctly remember back in those days in 2018 and 19, even speaking about the word radicalization was more like a taboo in India's academic circles. And it was Vivekananda Foundation and your esteemed leadership, which gave me the opportunity to write my first book on radicalization. And then my second book on terror financing in Kashmir. And terror financing in Kashmir was an altogether different world, highly convoluted, completely layered, and something which even FATF could find it so difficult to fathom, because there were strange and very unique ways to raise finances, like selling MBBS seats, raising money through Hajj tours and travel. But then definitely you gave me the opportunity to write the book, and it's under, it's in the process of publishing right now. Thank you very much. And I would also like to thank all the authors who have contributed to this book of ours. Preeti, can you just show me the content section? So yes, I'm just going to mention the names of the authors. Dr. Shriparna Pathak from Jindal, she has contributed a chapter. And Preeti, can you just scroll down? Yeah. Then Divyanshu Jindal and Mehak Marwa, they're also from Jindal. Then my brother Ararat Kostanian, he's sitting here. He's always a very passionate and a very keen student of developments in terrorism. He has contributed one chapter. And I requested him to write the chapter. He did at very short notice. I'm really thankful to him. Then Jay Maniar has written a chapter. Kritika Karmakar has contributed. Neeraj Singh Manhas is one of the authors. Niranjan Marjani, Ridipta Singh, and Mr. Rahul Tanwani. So these are the people who have contributed chapters. I have also written one chapter on the PFI, which is a less talked subject in the international terrorism discourse, but definitely with the recent banning of the organization, it has come to limelight. I would like to thank Ambassador Trigunath for writing the foreword, and also James Dorsey for writing the beautiful foreword for this book. Okay. Thank you very much, sir. And from now, I'll request Ambassador Trigunath, who is the Chief Coordinator of Maharana Pratap Annual Geopolitics Dialogue 2023. He is the Chief Coordinator of this conference, and also a mentor, friend, philosopher, and guide for Usanas Foundation in our journey so far. Sir, please give your brief remarks and formally begin the conference by inviting Ambassador Sajjanhar, who is chairing the first session.
Thank you, Usanas. And I must congratulate you once again for organizing this very important annual dialogue, which focuses on very key issues. And we heard Dr. Arvind Gupta about the kind of initiatives that India is taking or ought to take in the international discourse as it evolves. We are seeing tremendous challenges to the existing world order, or rather transitional world order that we are living in. We are not aware exactly how it's going to play out eventually, which way the world is going to go, which way the current ongoing war is going to go. But one thing is for sure, that we are looking at the dividing lines which are deepening by the day, be it China or US, be it between Russia and US. In the near future, we do not see anything that is going to bring them about together. There has been an effort between in the Sino-US context to have some kind of coexistence rather. Because at the moment, I think neither the Americans nor the Chinese wanted to escalate beyond the point while the Russia-Ukraine war is going on. But these are the things that are really beyond anybody's. We have seen in the World War I, World War II, how they were played out, how the small incidents really flared them up. So one has to be very careful. But at the moment, we are seeing also a change in the global financial architecture, that more and more countries are now looking to have the bilateral transactional arrangements. So in this particular Cold War 2.0, the way it plays out will also have divided lines with regard to the financial architecture, so which will also have a major problem. Now today, all the major issues that confront the humanity as a whole, be it climate change, be it terrorism, or for that matter, poverty, they have just all taken a backseat. Nobody talks about SDGs anymore. So what we are looking at is that we will see more and more poverty, more and more problems in the global south. And that's why what Prime Minister Modi has done is that try to project the concerns of the global south under its chairmanship of the G20. That is an extremely important initiative. And the Vasudev Kutumbakam that Dr. Gupta talked about, what is our theme of the G20, has been India's DNA. And I think that India not only talks about it, it lives up to it all the time. And that's what we have seen. So I think that in this conference, while we will be talking about what is happening and what will the role India will have in the emerging world order, this will be probably come out with some solutions, some suggestions, practical ones, with the participation of such an eminent galaxy of speakers, thinkers, professionals, and the practitioners. So I'm looking forward to listening to as much as I can, and of course share my thoughts tomorrow at the 10 a.m. Session. But in the meantime, I would like to request my senior colleague, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, to kindly take over for the next session. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Anil, for inviting me to moderate this session. And thank you also to Abhinav for organizing the Maharana Pratap annual geopolitical dialogue second year in a row. And it has truly taken off to a flying start. I am delighted to be here, and I would like to compliment both you, Abhinav, as well as Dr. Arvind Gupta and Ambassador Anil Trivinayak for their opening remarks, which have provided me with an excellent platform to take on as far as the subject today is concerned, for this session is concerned. From 10 to 11:30, we are going to be speaking about India and the changing world order, global expectations, and Indian perspectives. All our previous speakers, including the chair of the Usanas Foundation, have spoken about it quite extensively. So what I'm going to do is flag a few issues in my opening remarks. We have a set of three eminent, well-known, distinguished speakers and thinkers. And I'm sure all of us will look forward to listening to them and getting their perspective on this particular subject. So I think the first issue that we need to be cognizant of when we are talking about the international world order today, that it is truly characterized by turmoil, by turbulence, by uncertainty. Of course, it is not that there was no turmoil or turbulence earlier, but I think it would be appropriate to say that in the 40 odd years of the Cold War, 45 odd years of the Cold War, there was some sort of a dynamic equilibrium. And then, as was mentioned, the last decade of the last century saw the moment of unipolarity, which also disappeared and dissipated with the 9/11 attacks. Even over the last 20 plus years, we have seen a lot of changes. But the sort of changes that have been brought about over the last 3 years, particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the Russia-Ukraine conflict, I think this has totally upended the international world order as we have known it so far. In fact, Prime Minister Modi had equated the situation today to the position of in the aftermath of the Second World War. And when he was speaking in Bali on the last G20 summit, and he said that we really need to work towards a new world order. And I think that would be a correct assessment of the situation as it stands today. Because if the pandemic, what we saw from 2000, early 2020, late 2019, it still doesn't seem to have gone away from us. I have just been late last night, I have come back from Vietnam, and I saw, although the country has been able to handle it very well, but in terms of the fact we are not used to seeing masks being worn everywhere that we go. In Vietnam, people are still continue to very strictly wear masks and also enforce wearing masks. So I think this whole fear and threat, it has definitely not gone anywhere, and it will continue to stay with us for a long time. And this, as has been mentioned, this is a pandemic of this nature, which is taking place after a century. Even as far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned, I think it would be right to say that although it is happening in one part of the world, in Europe, in a country which is not a very large country, but in terms of its implications on the world, they are truly global. whether it's been mentioned in the morning and earlier also, whether it is the fuel shortages, whether it is the food, fertilizer shortages, it is the inflation, it is the exposing the debt vulnerabilities, particularly as far as developing countries are concerned. It is in terms of the supply chain disruptions that are taking place in different countries, regions, and different sectors. So it has truly been had global implications, and also the in terms of the implications, they are extremely severe because the countries are today armed with much more lethal weapons. We keep hearing about the threat of nuclear conflict. So I think it would not be off the mark at all to say that the situation as it prevails today is very dire. Of course, India, as has been mentioned, has dealt quite admirably with the crisis that have been affecting the world, whether it is in the area of the vaccinations within the country, whether it is in terms of under our Vaccine Maitri initiative, supplying close to 300 million vaccines to more than 100 countries, most of them on a gratis basis, in terms of administering our own vaccines, in terms of being able to develop our own vaccines, and also in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict to take a more measured, balanced, middle of the road approach. We have been able to handle this effectively. So whether it is in terms of the threat to our security and territorial integrity that took place from across our borders in middle of 2020, or it is in the area of protecting the health of our people, or in terms of our economic response to these crises. India today is the fifth largest global economy. It is slated to become the third largest by the end of this decade or by the beginning of next decade. And also, as most of the international organizations have said that India is today a ray of hope, while elsewhere there is darkness and gloom, whether it is the managing director of the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. And of course, India has dealt with these challenges in a very focused and determined manner, whether it is through its emphasis on startups, on digitization, on Make in India, on financial inclusion, and so on and so forth. So it is in this context that India has assumed the presidency of G20. Now, it is right to note that India has focused, its theme is one Earth, one family, one future. Of course, this is no stranger as far as India's articulation of its ideas and philosophy is concerned, because India had Prime Minister Modi, when he spoke at his first UN General Assembly session, he then also reiterated the idea and the ideology of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is, the whole world is a family. But I think what really makes it today is that what makes it particularly significant and important today is that India has the capability and the credibility to walk the talk in terms of taking the countries together on the path. So I think there are a number of challenges, but also there are a number of the track record that India has had also inspires some confidence. And this is what Prime Minister Modi had said, that India will have an action-oriented and inclusive and ambitious agenda as far as the G20 is concerned. So there are huge expectations from India, global expectations, but we'll have to see whether India will be able to meet those expectations and provide a real life, a significant make a significant contribution as far as challenges of the world are concerned. As far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned, we are coming to 1 year, completion of 1 year in a few weeks' time, 2 weeks' time. And it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. In fact, it is becoming even more violent. There is expected to be the escalation in the conflict in Ukraine, and also Ukraine is being supplied by even more lethal weapons from the West. And there is also, I think we'll have to see, because India is not only assuming has assumed the presidency of G20, but also the presidency of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So we'll have to see whether two of the major world leaders like President Putin and President Xi Jinping, whether they would be in a position to visit India twice within a span of a few months. I'm sorry, my connection just went off. I don't know why, but I'll possibly stop here, and I invite the speakers that we have, the three very distinguished and eminent speakers for the session today. And the first on my list is Dr. James M. Dorsey. He is a well-known, well-respected analyst, thinker, and journalist. You have the floor, sir, for 15 minutes. If you could share your views, and then we'll come to the other speakers. You have the floor.
Thank you, and good morning from Jakarta Airport. I owe a debt to the organizers for inviting me, but also for accommodating me, given that I can only join you for a short while. This could well be India's century, if it... Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, it's okay.
Hello?
Yeah,
it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. This could well be India's century, if it plays its cards right. I'm not going to dwell in any length on the multiple domestic issues that India has to address, but briefly focus on the larger geopolitical future. In doing so, I'll sketch some thoughts that I hope we will have a little bit of time to deepen out in discussion. As a matter of principle, India is the China of the future, even if its path is going to be less straightforward than that of China, more of a Leninist 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. Nevertheless, India finds itself, as one Indian analyst put it, in a geopolitical sweet spot. The recent defense and technology agreements with the United States constitute a milestone. The agreements recognize realities as they are, including that one underestimates the United States at one's peril, and the fact that despite their domestic travails, the US and Britain still together produce 50% of global wealth, as opposed to China and Russia's combined 20%. The agreements are also a key step towards enabling India to redress its trade imbalances that are skewed in China's favor. India, of course, has geographic and geopolitical concerns of its own, including a border and a border dispute with China. Moreover, I would argue that the agreements are one building block in eventual moves towards a multilateral security arrangement in the Gulf, in which India would likely be one of the key players. That is not why the agreements were concluded, nor is that what is foremost at this moment in the minds of Indian and American policymakers. But inevitably, that is where the Gulf is going for multiple reasons. These include a U.S. desire to restructure America's commitment to Gulf security and share the burden with regional players. The United States is not yet at a point where it is willing to share control of Gulf security commitments, but it is something that policymakers in both the Trump and Biden administrations have at various times looked at. It's an option that the U.S. has not taken to the point of pursuing it, but neither has either administration rejected it out of hand. Similarly, Gulf states continue to look to the United States for the guaranteeing of their security interests. But over time, and as U.S. thinking evolves, Gulf states, like in other aspects, are likely to want to more assertively hedge their bets and diversify their relationships. We are already seeing that India is a player on which they are setting their sights. Already, India's security posture in the region is changing. India is deploying ships regularly on a mission basis in the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Aden. It has stepped up its military engagement with Arab states and has a presence in Oman's Duqm port. The most complex issue in this regard is Iran. India will not allow its foreign relationships to be put at risk by cooperation with Iran. Yet Iran is India's gateway into Afghanistan and Central Asia. Add to this that depending on how US-China relations evolve, it is only a matter of time until China will no longer want to be dependent on an adversary for guaranteeing its energy security. Chinese port, pipeline, and other infrastructure investments in various parts of Asia may allow it to reduce energy security risks in the Indo-Pacific, but do not address threats in various strategic Gulf waters. Also, there is no Indo-Pacific strategy that does not include the Arabian Sea, which by definition requires Indian involvement, not least because of its geographic proximity. The maxim is reinforced from India's perspective by the security presence of China, India's foremost regional rival that starts with a military base in Djibouti and is likely to expand. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken noted that the I2U2 group, that groups India with the United States, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates, was as much about economic cooperation as it was about working together on maritime security. Last but not least, India is set to emerge as one of the world's top 3 or 4 economies in the next few years and has its own strategic energy, security, and economic interests in the Gulf, including the millions of Indian expatriates and workers who work and live in the region. These interests include badly needed foreign investment from the Gulf. Already, India has signed multiple agreements, including with the United Arab Emirates for cooperation in the defense and space industries. India's ability to get its domestic house in order and grow its economy, coupled with its regional relationships, is likely to be a factor in shaping a 21st century world order. That will be on display with this year's Indian chairmanship of the Group of 20. The one domestic remark I would make is that with religion emerging as a more prominent G20 engagement track, intercommunal relations are likely to gain greater attention. India, like China, has so far benefited by Muslim states emphasizing national rather than communal and identitary interests. That may prove to be a fragile proposition over time. The G20 is where India's motto for its chairmanship, One Inclusive World, will be put under an ever greater, brighter spotlight. Even so, India will be a determining factor in whether a new world order will be multipolar rather than a bipolar US-China dominated world in which multiple middle powers will prove to be far more assertive with greater agency. It will also be a world in which functional and regional blocs like the I2U2 or Chip 4, the semiconductor alliance between Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, as well as the Northern Transport Corridor linking India and the Indian Ocean with Europe, will play a greater role. It will furthermore be a world in which Russia, as a result of the Ukraine war, is likely to be a middle rather than a superpower, a consideration that will not be lost on India, particularly in a world in which the principle of inviolability of international borders and the right to self-determination have become even more paramount for stability. Thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dorsey, for your comments. I think you made several very significant and important remarks. First, I think to begin with, that India seems to be in some sort of geopolitical sweet spot. The second, that the religion issues are taking predominance as far as G20 deliberations are concerned. And there will be a greater spotlight on India. I think those are issues that we can discuss. And maybe finally, that Russia is going to emerge more as a middle power rather than continue as a superpower that it was during the Cold War times, and even had the potential of becoming over the last 10 years or so. So thank you for your comments, and also thank you for being with us, although you are speaking from the airport. And I must say that you've got a good connection, and you've been able to have a noise-free articulation of your presentation. Let me now
a bit of luck with me.
Okay, good. I hope this stays like that. The next speaker is Ambassador Daniel Carmon. He's a well-known person in India. Definitely, he's a former Israeli ambassador to India, very popular, very articulate, very outgoing, and the Deputy Permanent Representative at Israel's mission to the United Nations. He's also the recipient of Israel's highest award for public service. You have the floor, Ambassador Carmon. 15
very
minutes,
much,
please. Yeah.
and thank you for inviting me. When I get a call from India nowadays, since I left India, I didn't really live India, and being an ex-ambassador to Delhi, I continue to feel that in some way, nobody nominated me, but in some way I want to continue to be some kind of an Indian ambassador, not the official one, but an Indian ambassador of India in Israel. I keep being very much interested in what's happening in your country, and I really feel it's a second home for me, and I've been back for a few times since I left office. I must say that looking at India from the perspective of a foreigner, a foreign diplomat, a foreign ex-diplomat, and a practitioner, I have pointed out during my stay and since I left office a few landmark events, if I may say, and the two most significant ones relative and relevant to this conversation is a speech given on 15th of August 2014 by the newcomer to Delhi, Narendra Modi, where he articulated a few challenges. He said, I come from the outside. I'm new. I want to learn, but I do have some points I'd like to articulate as challenges of India, and I won't go and enumerate them, but I would like to say that it was amazing to see, not only to hear the speech, but also to see how things are implemented with success or without success, but the efforts done by the leaders, by the government, by the administration in India to go by those challenges. The second event is the 15th of August speech 2022, where I noted very carefully every single point that Prime Minister Modi pledged when he said, I want to transform India into a development country in the next 25 years, where although those were internal challenges of India and Indians, many of them, many more than in 2014, many of them have to do with international relations, international diplomacy, and international challenges that India faces. And it's amazing to see both in 2014 and in 2022, the interlinkage between internal and external challenges and the meeting of those by the government and the marching orders, so to speak, to the administrations which are implementing those policies that meet the challenges or try to meet the challenges. It's very complicated, as my predecessor said here, rightly so. The internal challenges are huge. India has not solved many of them, and it's amazing to see how it does both and how one is linked with the other. And I remember one particular sentence by Prime Minister Modi in one of his speeches where he said that the external policy is subject or comes to help and encourage solving the internal, something that is very, I mean, it's I would say it's the same in any country, but the way he articulated it, the way he made this linkage was very impressive, and I think that you can feel it day in and day out when you cover as a foreign diplomat Indian internal and external affairs. I think that while looking at India nowadays, of course, needless to say that India has changed dramatically since being a non-aligned movement leader. I would say more or less as a young diplomat, when I was told something about India, India for me was a huge country with thousands of years of culture. But nowadays I felt, and I'm talking about 30, 40 years ago, as a balancing non-aligned movement, almost maybe passive country, huge country, but not very much involved in world affairs, very much involved within its own. This has changed dramatically throughout the years. I don't want to put specific dates to it, but like so many things in diplomacy, there is an ongoing process, probably still ongoing. On the one hand, forming internally the identity of India as a unified, I use in Hebrew the expression of the United States of India, on the one hand. On the other hand, using the external diplomacy of India to make stronger the internal challenges that India has to meet. So there is nothing you cannot compare the role of India when it was a very important yet balancing and maybe a little passive country before, and what it is now, much more proactive, more involved in world affairs, and mixing diplomacy with the needs of the country, and sharing with the world the experience and the know-how and the knowledge that India has within itself, which is remarkable. I've looked at You mentioned the disaster, the terrible disaster in Turkey nowadays. India is a leading first responder. In parentheses, I would say that I feel a parallel path in which Israel and India, together with dozens of other countries, of course, meet as responders to the Turkish disaster, putting aside all politics, totally looking only at saving lives, and it's a true matter. No cynicism and no irony in this, but only real serious need to save lives. India, you mentioned before, Africa, India, very active in world affairs in the international multilateral world, which we know has become very weakened in the last few decades. I think it's in a very worrying low nowadays, but this has brought India and many others to the conclusion that regional partnerships maybe would not come instead of the world multilateral architecture, but definitely are the interim solution, at least interim solution to what is needed. And some partnerships were mentioned here, like I2, U2, or like the more regional partnerships where India really puts a lot of efforts. Not to mention the more strategic Quad that India is part of. But I do want to mention something that I used to call a new kind of diplomacy. In the past, where I started as a young diplomat in 1973, diplomacy was much more bilateral. We were doing things hush-hush. Everything was secret and discreet between governments, and that's it. I think that in the last decades and nowadays we came to maybe unparalleled before. Diplomacy is a very large area where diplomats from all countries talk about everything, from public diplomacy to defense to economics and to political policies also. And in this regard, both Israel and India, and I'm talking in the perspective of an Israeli diplomat, of course, a huge country like India, a regional power of its own, and a small country like Israel, which has its own challenges, both internal, as you've heard lately, and external, both have a meeting ground. And it's amazing to see the changes, and I will talk a little bit about the changes that we have seen together as two strategic partners. We are now strategic partners, as we all know. The changes and the meeting points between those two countries, and I don't know if you heard, but last night Prime Minister Netanyahu and Prime Minister Modi had one of those important conversations between them. The importance of those conversations, and I don't have to tell you about it because you know exactly how visits and conversations stir activities. And this a point like yesterday is an important one to mention. But I do want to go a little bit, not as a historical chronological account, but I want to highlight the huge revolution that those two countries have seen in their relations. And this might reflect the changes that India, although it's a very punctual bilateral change, it shows a lot, and it's very symbolic to the change that India has gone from being a an active passive non-participant to what India is looking nowadays as its partners. As we all know, until 1992, there were no diplomatic relations. From 1992, a process emerged. Part of it was very, very discreet. Part of it started with defense, with what now is a huge defense partnership, but it started slowly and slowly, but by slowly the visibility became more apparent. And around 2014, and I really, I on purpose do not want to put May 2014 as a turning point, because it happened before, but the visibility of things really happened in the summer of 2014, where India emerged with a Middle East policy that what we call dehyphenation, saying we could have good relations with the Arab world. We are committed to the Palestinian cause, but we do want to have good bilateral relations with Israel, and this is what will happen. And it happened. In complete contrast to what we had before. And this contrast and this policy is since then the name of the game. And may I say, with little protest, or if there is protest or was protest, we didn't hear it. This new policy shows that India has its own narrative, and we have more examples of Indian own narrative, very well articulated, especially by External Affairs Minister Jaishankar, a brilliant diplomat. So the Indian narrative, in our perspective, was very clear and gave the utensils to both countries, so different, but having so much in common, to cooperate. And if I talked before about the importance of visits and leaders' calls, we had during 4 years, 4 very important bilateral presidential and prime ministerial visits, in which I can tell you without any and without being too prudent, the Indian side was the one that came to us and said, no, we do not, it's not enough to talk about agriculture partnership. We want to change our the bilateral status between us to strategic partnership. It was an Indian request which we wholeheartedly supported, of course. So I don't want to go too much into the Israel-Indian relationship, but I do want to highlight the symbolism. India, probably since 2014, maybe a little before, India looks much more 360 degrees around it, looking for partners in specific areas. We are happy to be a partner in the field of water and agriculture and defense, high-tech innovation, of course. There are areas which we do not cover on our bilateral side. There are areas on the political side that we differ from India. We do not agree on everything. We do not see eye to eye. For example, the Russian invasion in Ukraine, because India has its own narrative and Israel has its own interests, but it doesn't mean that we don't discuss them. I'm talking as if I'm still in office, but it doesn't mean that we do not discuss them in what is called diplomatic channels, but we have matured enough to be able to speak about our differences, like the Palestinian issue, in closed doors, without going to the press, without spinning, without tweeting, because that's the beauty and that's the strength of our bilateral relations. In the same way, I know that India is maintaining very good bilateral relations with many other countries. As I said before, 360 degrees, where partnerships is the name of the game. Partnership, friendship, and the joint interests, whether on the multilateral side or on the regional side, on the bilateral side. All of them are very well covered by what I see as a practitioner and as an observer of Indian policy, as a brilliant political, brilliant diplomatic, new diplomacy kind of thing. Still, as my predecessor has said, Mr. Dorsey has said before, still India has to challenge a few, to confront a few challenges. India has to decide, and I'm not sure it's decided already, if it is a regional or a global power. My feeling is that it is still in the area of regional power, and I'm not sure it wants to be a global power, but that's of course a decision that India has to make. But if it does want to go and be a new China, as was mentioned before, then there are more things that should be done. Africa is definitely one thing. I remember a huge summit of African leaders in Delhi a few years ago, but there is a little more to do than just summits. India has to be maybe more active if it wants to be to put more parameters of globalism, but I'm not sure that India is there. The challenges of being a regional power are big enough and are met in a very nice way, I must say. On the multilateral side, I have to mention one thing, being at the United Nations for a few years. I know that there is an expectation for a permanent seat in the Security Council. It's a tough issue. It's a tough issue. And I want to make to distance the need and the will. And as a non-diplomat, but as a citizen of the world, I think reforms must be done. If I want to be practical, if I want to be to look at things as they are, I fear that the P5 in the Security Council are not very keen to make changes in the Security Council. It has nothing to do with India. It can affect the other aspirants to have permanent seats, and all of those aspirants are right on their own. But I would not be ready with the Security Council suits yet. It might take a while, if at all, and this is something that I always told my Indian counterparts, although as a country we have given India assurances that if and when it comes to fruition, Israel will support. I will stop here, and I'll be glad to be part of the questions and answers later, because I think my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Carmon, for your very perceptive and thoughtful comments. Very quickly, I think you mentioned that even after leaving India, you still feel as if you are the Indian ambassador in Israel. And I think this is a feeling that not only you, but several of the diplomatic colleagues who have been here who continue to feel. Of course, not only at the level of diplomats, but I remember when President Clinton came here, and in 2000, his first visit in March 2000, that was his last year in office, and he went back and he said that he has become the unofficial ambassador of India in Washington, D.C. And that is truly how it was, because his visit really took the relationship to a new or higher level. And maybe something similar could be said about your tenure here in India. As you said, over the last, since 2014, the relations between India and Israel have seen a quantum jump. In fact, I recall that when Prime Minister Modi went to Israel for the maiden visit by an Indian Prime Minister in 2017, Prime Minister Netanyahu met him at the airport. He said, "You are of course welcome, but why did it take you so long?" Because this was after 25 years of the establishment of the diplomatic relations between the two countries. And this is truly because I think the de-hyphenation had taken place between, of course, some sort of de-hyphenation in 1992, but truly de-hyphenation because Prime Minister Modi came to Israel and then he visited Ramallah later on, quite separately. So there was no linkage between the two at all. So both these relations stand on their own merits and on their own strength. Of course, you made a large number of other important points, as you mentioned, many internal challenges that India faces. But I guess Israel also being a democracy, meaning this is the fate of all democracies. We would not be a democracy if there were no internal challenges, if there were no internal strife and fight for political power within the country. And so in that sense, these challenges will be there. And the external challenges, of course, when you see a world so full of turmoil and uncertainty, of course, the external challenges will also be there. But I will finish my brief comments here, and I'm sure there'll be very many questions. I see that Dr. Dorsey has had to leave in the meantime because he was at the airport and maybe he was, catching a flight. But I would request and invite all participants to please pen in their questions in the chat box. I could, of course, when we come to the discussion session after the presentation by Professor Dr. Stephen R. Nagy, we will go into discussions. So the questions can be put in the chat box, but of course, I will invite individuals to ask questions directly also if they would so like to. So let me now introduce and invite our third and last speaker, Dr. Stephen R. Nagy. He is the Senior Associate Professor at the International Christian University in Tokyo. He's the visiting fellow with the Japan Institute for International Affairs. You have the floor, sir, for 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Foundation, for inviting me to contribute to this wonderful discussion. It's a wonderful opportunity to share some views. So I've been asked to speak about the changing world order, India, and global expectations for India. And I'd like to do this first by talking about the changing world order, at least how I understand it. And then I'd like to bring in some perspectives about India from Japan, and that's where I'm based. And then lastly, I think look at some vehicles where I think India can translate hope into some real policy. And I think that's really important. How can India translate hope into policy that really provides a public good to the region? So to begin with, I think the idea of a changing world order is a significant question for all of us to be thinking about. And I do think that we see broadly three scenarios: a bipolar world emerging, a multipolar world emerging, or some kind of hybrid. I think most analysts see that a bipolar world is the likely direction that we're moving in. I say this because I think in the context of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, we are likely to see Russia come out of the conflict in a much weaker position. Its relationship with China will be a hierarchical relationship with China at the top. And this will create a bipolar, a short-term bipolar world in which China and the United States continue to deepen their strategic rivalry. That being said, there are arguments for a multipolar world in which India, perhaps Europe, create alternative poles. I think the challenge with this narrative is that comprehensively the power differentials between the United States, China, Europe, and India still remain quite distant. In that sense, a hybrid world order may be the world order that we should be expecting in the coming decades. Why I say hybrid is that I think that the United States will continue to remain a comprehensive power above and beyond all other parties However, China will continue to be an economic power and military power within its periphery. Europe will continue to be a regulatory power and economic power. And India, of course, will be moving towards a position of broader comprehensive power, economic power, diplomatic power. And I'm going to come back to this, but the idea of a normative power. And I think this is really, really important for us to be thinking about where India fits in the new changing order and where India can really provide leadership. So bipolar, multipolar, and hybrid. The next question is, how do countries like Japan see India? Is it a great power? Is it a middle power? What kind of partner is it? And Japan continues to see India as a place of extreme hope. Hope as an economic partner in terms of the synergies that Japan and India have. Japan is capital rich, technology rich. Of course, they have a long-standing historical and cultural relationship in which Japan has inherited many of its cultural traditions from India. At the same time, the hope for a more synergistic economic relationship is also characterized by, I think, unfulfilled potential. And here, the Japanese are thinking about, the challenges of investing in India. And to put it clear, Japan has been the biggest investor, and India continues to be the biggest recipient of Japanese ODA, not for the past decade, but for more than 15 years. Japan sees overseas development assistance as key to helping build India's strategic autonomy, helping build its economy, and helping it be a complementary economic partner to shape the Indo-Pacific region. But it also has concerns about infrastructure, about the variety of forms of government, or the variety of challenges in terms of investing into India, and how reliable and stable it is. From Japan's point of view, an India that can realize its potential will be a partner to deal with diplomatic challenges within the region. It will be a partner to help forge a stable and peaceful Indo-Pacific region. And it will be a partner that shares much of its worldview in terms of preventing Chinese hegemony from emerging within the region, but also having a complementary, beneficial economic relationship with China. And that is important. I often bring this figure up, but in 2021, the Japan-China relationship was about $391 billion. It's a relationship that cannot be severed, but it's a relationship that's complex. And I think here, again, India shares many of the challenges in terms of the economic benefits it has from China, but also the geopolitical challenges that come from that relationship. Lastly, when the Japanese are thinking about India, they're thinking about what kind of power it will be moving forward. Will it be a great power in the sense of Japan, the United States, and China, competing for geopolitical gain within the region? Or will it be a power that tries to stabilize international institutions in a way that middle powers such as Japan or Canada or others have consistently tried to do, is maintain a rules-based order by investing in international institutions? In this sense, I think Japan looks at India today in many ways as it looks at itself. The potential to be a great power, the potential to get involved in the great power politics of the region, but at the same time, an abiding interest in investing in and helping build international institutions so that they curb a might of right approach, a Machiavellian approach to international relations within the region. So in terms of how India can, again, contribute to this changing world order and work with countries like Japan to build stability into the Indo-Pacific, I think there's several pre-existing institutions or minilateral relationships that I think India can provide a tremendous amount of leadership. First is the quadrilateral security dialogue. And we've seen the quadrilateral security dialogue emerge and evolve away from a primary security platform to one that is focusing on public goods provisions, whether it's focusing on infrastructure and connectivity, the manufacturing and distribution of vaccines, or technology. India will be a critical and key partner in all of these pillars to try and shape the Indo-Pacific's political economy so that it continues to evolve based on rules, based on transparency, and based on this idea of stability and cooperation amongst like-minded countries. There are other important pillars that India is cooperating in. One is the Regional Supply Chain Initiative, that is a cooperative mechanism between Australia, Japan, and India to fortify and strengthen supply chains to the region. This does not mean decoupling from China, but rather selectively diversifying and building resilience into the region's economy to prevent another transnational disease or a non-traditional security disaster such as an earthquake or a typhoon from disrupting supply chains. Here, Japan, Australia, and India are working together to try and build stability into the system. We also see Japan and India working together in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of building more synergy between their economies. This will be important as Japan continues to try and selectively diversify away from the Chinese market by building closer to consumer markets. One of those consumer markets is Southeast Asia, but South Asia, in particular India, represents a critical part of Japan's strategy to build more stability into the Indo-Pacific regional economy. And of course, India will continue to be a critical partner. Interestingly, I think that India also is working in other minilateral relationships, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to shape that organization from within. And I think this is a very smart way of playing both the Chinese side of the geopolitical competition within the region, but also being part of US-led or Japan-led or cooperative mechanisms like the Japan-Australia-India partnership. So these mechanisms, whether it's the Quad or infrastructure cooperation or economic cooperation or organizations such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, are important ways for India to seek its interests within the Indo-Pacific region, to check potential adversaries and ensure that how they are building organizations are not going to be built in a way that prejudices India's interests. And India understands that it has strong partners like Japan that have the economic interests and the capital to help India achieve some of its goals of development, broad-based social economic prosperity, and achieving a more stable and forthright position within the region. These vehicles will continue to be important, but I don't think we should continue to see these vehicles only through India's role in the Indo-Pacific and broadly through these institutions. We should understand that India is going to be and continues to be an important economic contributor to the region's economic development. It is one of the fastest growing economies in 2022, and that will continue to be the case. Its role as a security provider in the Indian Ocean will only deepen as strategic competition continues to enhance. And importantly, and I think most significantly, India's cooperation and participation, whether it's in the Quad or its deepening partnership with the United States, is critically important to demonstrate that India, as a developing country, is standing side by side as equal partners with developed countries in shaping the norms of the Indo-Pacific region. And I think this is tremendously important in terms of India's pressing its interests and its development perspectives in the Indo-Pacific and broadly, but also to counter the narrative that the current rules-based order is one that has been primarily built by Western societies. I think that India, working again with the United States, Japan, and other developing countries to continue to shape, protect, and invest in the rules-based order demonstrates that the current rules-based order is one that has been built and is being protected, and it's being invested in by not only Western countries and developed countries, but importantly by significant developing countries like India. This normative role is going to continue to be important. I continue to see India to have an incredibly influential position in shaping the rules of the region. And that means working with like-minded countries like Japan, like the United States, but also not excluding other countries like China on issues that a common cause like the environment. I'll stop there and again say thank you very much to the organizers, and I look forward to a very interesting exchange. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nagy, for your very perceptive comments. You have spoken about the world order as it is emerging and also the role that India can play and the position that India has. We have another more than about 35 minutes for our discussion, our question answers. And I would invite anyone from the audience to raise their hands or to type out the questions in the chat box so that we can go through the discussions. But let me set the ball rolling, and we have two of the speakers here. So my first question to Ambassador Carmon would be, Ambassador, you mentioned that of course, India looks forward to becoming a permanent member of the UN Security Council, but this is not the right time to yet start getting the UNSC Permanent Council membership suits ready, because it might be still quite some time in the future. My question to you would be in terms of the relevance of multilateralism today, because this is something that Prime Minister Modi has also spoken very strongly that multilateralism has failed the world in terms of the current structures which were created just after the Second World War. And we can see what the implications of that are, whether it is the pandemic, the UN Security Council was not able to step up to the plate, not even have a meeting in the UN Security Council to deal with this challenge. And also, as far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned, we've had all these debates and discussions, whether in the UNSC or in the UNGA. And in the UNGA, the first few discussions, 143 countries voting against Russia, just about 4 or 5 countries voting against in favor of Russia, and a large number of them abstaining. But still, it has not been able to do anything. So the relevance of the multilateral institutions and whether the UN Security Council is in a manner being replaced by the G20, which is going beyond its economic agenda to also cover the political issues, as you cannot shirk the conflict that is taking place in Ukraine. And to you, Professor Nagy, my question would be, you mentioned that bipolar structure in the world appears to be the more likely of the two to occur. But if you look at some of the aspects, for instance, if China overtook the United States as the largest economy in the world in purchasing power parity terms in 2013, there were projections that even in nominal global dollar terms, it would be able to surpass the United States by 2027. Some people said 2032. But now there is an increasing body of opinion which says that it might not be before 2060, if at all, that China might be able to come close to the US economy in terms of its size. And looking at in terms of the international situation in which it is placed, whether it is the US-China trade wars that are taking place, whether it is in terms of the demographic decline that is taking place, whether it is in terms of the impact and the implications of the zero COVID policy, which have resulted in its economy registering a GDP growth of 3%, which is the lowest in half a century, in 50 years. So under these circumstances also, what do you foresee as the trajectory of growth politically, economically, as far as China is concerned? So let me throw these two questions, and then I can see that there are some questions coming up in the chat box also. We'll come back to that. So first, Ambassador Carmon, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to first say something again about the Security Council. My feeling is, and I don't think I'm the only person who thinks so, there is no appetite. I'm not sure if and where there will be more appetite than today to enlarge the membership of the P5 or the permanent seats. So on the one hand, I would encourage India, and like India, Japan, Germany, Brazil, what is the G4 as they are called, or any other configuration of aspirants to permanent seats in the Security Council to continue their campaign for that. I would not discourage them, but I would like to put a practical telescope or a practical camera to be sure that they know that the chances of changing are relatively low, if not low. And for this, the answer to this, and I'm sure it's not satisfactory, but the answer to this is a more frequent presence of at least those 4 countries who merit to be in the Security Council, at least those 4 countries to be more frequently. And I think that we see that in all those countries, and India, as we know, had a very important presence in the Security Council throughout the years, including until a few months ago. On the world multilateral bodies, especially the United Nations, of course, we all know the weaknesses of the United Nations. We have so many examples of the United Nations not meeting the expectations, and the United Nations even being counterproductive in many ways. But I have to say, we as a world community, we don't have an alternative until now, an alternative that encompasses all the countries in the world. Of course, G20 has a specific importance. Regional partnerships have very high importance. We have seen that it's much more efficient to have smaller partnerships because you can get better and quicker and more efficient decisions on areas, on common ground. But if we really want to take the world, and it's funny to hear an Israeli ex-diplomat or diplomat speak in favor of the United Nations, so I'm not going that far, but I want to be sure that we know what the United Nations is and if there is an alternative. The United Nations is built on 3 pillars: peace and security, human rights, and development, right? Peace and security, here and there is a touch here and there, but I'm not sure that any war was ever solved or any conflict was ever solved by the United Nations. The United Nations is more of a venue where you not sign the agreements, but at least give a stamp, an international stamp to agreements. And of course, you have the peacekeeping of the United Nations, which is very, very important and a remarkable body. The UN peacekeeping, it's not enforcing peace, it's making sure peace is kept without enforcing. And India, talking about India, has a very important role in peacekeeping. But peace and security will not be brought by the UN, as we all know. It's human rights, let alone human rights. We know how so many breaches of human rights throughout the world, and in some cases, the UN does not even deal with human rights breaches in some countries for various reasons. We will not go into which countries or where, but we know exactly what we're talking about. And that's it's more than a weakness. The new body, relatively new body of the security of the Human Rights Council is not meeting even 10% of what the world expected, and it's all really awkward. Development is something else. Development is something where I really feel that the world body, including the UN, despite the complication of getting resolutions decided or adopted in a body that has almost 200 members with different interests. I think there is a chance of the development part of the United Nations is still something that might promise to do good for the world, as we all say, and as we all aspire to. And I think we have enough examples in which initiatives by specific countries or regions do meet the needs and the expectations of the international community. It's not perfect, it's far from being perfect, but it's something that I would definitely leave as a positive note on the role that the United Nations can play. And again, it's not perfect, but it's there, and I would continue to use the developing side as the developing pillar of the United Nations as something with a positive outlook. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So what you've said is that there are certain elements in the United Nations which have done good work and which can be supported. And of course, there are certain other elements which do need change. But we need to focus on what things have worked and take them forward, while as far as the multilateral aspects are concerned, they might not have delivered as much as they should have or could have. But that doesn't mean that we should jettison them and just leave them aside. So let me come to the question to Dr. Stephen Nagy. We do have other questions in the chat box. So after you respond to this, Dr. Nagy, then we'll go to the questions in the chat box. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I think it's really important for us to be thinking about the structure of the international order and where will China be in 10 or 15 years. And I think the Lowy Institute's Asian Power Index is a really useful tool. They look at economic capability, military capability, resilience, future resources, economic relationships, defense networks, etc. And looking at these broad-based barometers, what we see is the United States remains head and shoulders above every single country comprehensively. But at the economic level, the size of the Chinese economy continues to increase, even though it's slow, right? This year they recorded 3% growth, which is a record low over 40 years. But that growth is a quality growth. And I think we should be careful in terms of thinking that the Chinese economy is going to sink anytime soon. When we look at military spending, the Chinese military spending last year was about $229 billion. That's still about half of the United States. And it's almost 4 times the third largest military spender, Japan, which was at about $54 billion. So we see a huge gap in terms of these capabilities. Now, you're correct that the COVID policies, the economic slowdown, demographics are all going to put enormous pressure on the Chinese economy. And it's likely going to either stagnate or it's going to face many domestic contradictions that will make it a much less agile, much less flexible competitor to the United States over the next 10 to 15 years. So the question is, and I think it's important, if we're thinking about the nature of global order moving forward, does it remain a bipolar system in which China and the United States are head and shoulders above others? Well, this will depend where India moves forward. And again, these are the policy choices that I mentioned. Will the Quad become a vehicle where India does provide a lot more public goods to the region? Will it step up its presence in the Indian Ocean? Will it join economic frameworks such as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Framework? These are all policy choices that our Indian friends can make to really change or to change how the international order will manifest in the coming years. In that sense, the choices are whether the global order will be multipolar or bipolar will be written in capitals like Delhi or in Brussels in terms of the policy choices they moving forward. Will they be comprehensive powers like the United States or China? or will they retain a rather narrow focus in terms of their power, such as economic power? I can't make these choices for India or the EU, but at this particular stage, I think the trend line suggests that we're moving towards a bipolar system in terms of comprehensive power.
Thank you very much, Professor Nagy. And now let me go back to the questions in the chat box. The first one we have is from Rajiv Narayanan, and that is to you, Professor Nagy. So I'll take one for each for both of the speakers, and then come back to you one after the other. So the question, as you can read, but let me read out for the general audience. What changes do you visualize to the rules-based order that appear to be out of step with current global geopolitical environment? I think this is something that you have alluded to in your previous response, but you might wish to elucidate on that further. And the question from the CEO of Usanas, Abhinav Pandya, is to Ambassador Carmon. China is expanding its influence and intelligence operations in West Asia. It can be seen in the rising defense exports by China to Arab countries. With Iran, China has a strong relationship. Given this context, what role do you see for India in the Middle East? Possibility of India-Israel cooperation to check Chinese geopolitical footprint? Because I'm sure China's outreach to Iran and other nations must be a concern for Israel too. But that, of course, Israel's relations with China are also very robust and very strong. So I think you will have to take cognizance of that. So first, let me come to Professor Nagy for the first question on the changes in the rules-based order.
So thank you very much. And I think it's from Hardik. So I think the changes in the current rules-based order are underway, and we see challenges to obeying international law. I think contemporary examples is the rejection by China of the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration's decision against its claims in the South China Sea. I think this is a stunning example, but also the renegation of the joint China-British 1984 Treaty on Hong Kong, preserving the Hong Kong independence in terms of its judicial processes and its ability to eventually elect its own leader after the adoption of the national security law. We seem to have a track record of challenging the current rules-based system in China's periphery. In that sense, I think the Quad presents a counterweight of like-minded countries that aim to coordinate and cooperate in providing public goods to the region, in supporting the rules-based order through infrastructure and connectivity, cooperation in terms of coordinating policies on search and rescue, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and maritime domain awareness activities. This mini-lateral relationship, and I think the ambassador alluded to this, a mini-lateral relationship allows for decisions to move forward in a more coordinated, in a faster decision process. And I think that these new mini-lateral relationships, whether it's the Quad or AUKUS or others, they have a group of countries that come together that can mostly cooperate on issues. And this is probably the contradictory challenge to the current rules-based order, is that if we work with, for example, the United Nations General Assembly, with so many different interests and so many possibilities to be influenced, it creates challenges in terms of coherent, sustained, and consequential action, which I think is really important for us to deal with the challenges to that the rules-based order is facing.
Thank you, Professor. Ambassador?
Professor Nagy's last comment was tremendously important when you think about next steps. I fully adhere to what you said, Professor. On China, I made a point when I was in Delhi never to put China and India in the same sentence. So you made me breach a tradition, my own tradition. But I'll gladly answer that. Israel, as you have said, has good relations with China, mainly economic relations. They're good. The trade trade is good. One of our best importers of Israeli goods and services, and exporter, of course, like it is with the rest of the Western world or the world by itself. And I know that India also has very good, if I'm not mistaken, commercial and economic relations with China too. I would not go, we are of course concerned, there's no doubts about it, but I think that we should be more concerned of China's and Russia's, I must add, support for Iran, including support at the United Nations when Iranian issues are brought to the United Nations. China and Russia are supporting Iran almost automatically. I'm more worried with this than with other things. And if someone has to be worried from Iran, it's not only Israel, but our whole region. And as we know, the Middle East as a whole, maybe except for Syria, is very worried about the Iranian activities, the destabilization, the support of terrorism, and of course the nuclear development of the nuclear issue. I would not put our relations, the very good, important, strategic relations between us and India anywhere with any other kind of relations, neither the positive ones nor the worrying ones. I would go India-Israel bilaterally, not look neither to the right nor to the left. We have a very special and unique relationship. Let's keep it as such without interference. Let's dehyphenate our relations with anything else that is beyond our relations. This would be my suggestion.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, Ambassador Carmon, because I think all the relationships really need to be seen on their own strengths, on their own merits, and to identify the opportunities that are available to further enhance them, further deepen them, further diversify them. And in that sense, India-Israel relations or India-US relations stand on their own footing, not only bilaterally, but even we have seen as far as the I2U2 is concerned. There are further questions. We have just about 14 minutes left of our session. There are a number of questions, so I'm going to read out the questions both for Professor Nagy and Ambassador Carmon. And I would request you to kindly take about 5 minutes each so that to respond to the questions that are posed to you, so that we have a few minutes at the end and I can hand over the floor back to the organizers. So for you, Ambassador Carmon, the question from Abhinav is, we see that as far as Pakistan is concerned, there's still a lack of sufficient recognition or awareness of Pakistan being still a lack of sufficient recognition or awareness of Pakistan being the epicenter of global terror machinery. With the return of the Taliban, AfPak region will be the hotbed of terrorism. Hence, Israel needs to be more upfront on the Pakistan issue, as there is a tremendous scope for tech and intelligence cooperation on terrorism and radicalization between India and Israel. Your thoughts, sir? From Hardik, the question to Professor Nagy is, you talked about the importance of preserving the current rules-based global order. What is the centrality of Quad in doing that? Another one to Ambassador Carmon from Arodhra Singh. How well do you think the prospects are of I2U2 balancing the Chinese economic presence in the Western Indian Ocean? And to Professor Nagy, again from Hardik. Since you are based in Japan, Japan's national security strategy talks of massively increasing defense expenditure. Does Japan feel that the US extended deterrence is waning in India Pacific? The last one to Professor Nagy is, how do you see the Japanese recent national security strategy, so it's the national defense strategy? So let me give the floor to the two speakers and a maximum of 5 minutes for each of you. So first, Professor Nagy, you may take the floor.
To these great questions, for these great questions. So I think when we are looking at Japan's national security strategy, I would like to kind of, first of all, in terms of where the budget has been in the past 30 years, and what we've seen is a fluctuation since 1990 to today between about $54 billion a year to $60 billion a year. It's been flat. And if we think about devaluation of the yen, they can actually buy less today than they could buy last year with the same amount of money. So this is really interesting, because when we look and compare to the Chinese, our Chinese friends have spent about $229 billion last year. It's a 7% increase from the year before. So almost 5 times as much in terms of military spending. Japan is advocating for reaching 2% of its GDP, so doubling its defense spending in 5 years to about 110 billion or 120 billion, which again, I think we should calculate, what does this mean? What does it say about long-term trends? And third, and I think importantly, what are they going to do with this money? And this goes to your questions of how do I see the national security strategy and national defense strategy. Japan is advocating for the acquisition of what we call satellite awareness technologies, maritime domain awareness technologies, over the horizon radar systems, so they know where adversaries' weapon systems are. They're advocating for increasing the wage of their self-defense forces so they can actually hire people and get them involved in defending their country. They are advocating for the acquisition of counter-strike capabilities. And these counter-strike capabilities are meant to deal with the real security challenges within the region. Our North Korean friends are pursuing what we call a saturation strategy, where they produce more missiles than the anti-ballistic missile system can manage. And with that, they want to move negotiations to the table with South Korea, Japan, and the United States to pursue a peace treaty. Japan sees counter-strike capabilities as a way to counter these capabilities. It would be interesting to hear what Ambassador Carmon has with his views on this, considering the what I think it's called the dome, the protection systems that the Israelis have against weapons coming in from Palestinian territories. So in terms of spending, we don't see much. In terms of procurement, we see the spending to be rather to be focused on defensive capabilities. And we see Japan not moving away from its 3 non-nuclear principles. That means no to nuclear weapons, no to allowing nuclear weapons to transit through Japan, and no producing nuclear weapons. We also see the strategies focus on a defense-oriented approach to managing security challenges. Japan is also trying to strengthen its relations with like-minded countries like India through cooperation and unilateral relationships like the Quad, but also through reciprocal access agreements with Australia, the UK. We're likely to see them with Germany and France and Canada in the coming years. These all suggest that Japan is doubling down on the US-Japan alliance, at the same time diversifying its partnerships to deal with the increasingly severe environment within the region. And that environment has to do with Chinese behavior, North Korean behavior, and in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, increasingly assertive Russia in the Indo-Pacific, aligning its interests with China. And this is why I think when we do a granular look at the national security strategy and defense strategy, that Japan is really thinking about building strong partnerships with countries like India. And that partnership is not just security cooperation, but again, working with India to build the political economy within the region, build resilient supply chains, build technology supply chains, so that Japan is wedded, Japan and its security future is wedded to the security of India, Southeast Asia, European countries, North America, as well as other countries. And with that, I see it's primarily defensive, not offensive, primary focus on partnerships, and again, investing in the political economy and defense partnerships throughout the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Nagy. Ambassador Carmon.
I was not asked about it, but I must make a small comment about what Professor Nagy said. There is an unprecedented development of relations between Japan and Israel, including on the defense side. I don't want to go into the details, but it's unprecedented,
Great.
which is something that is for us really very positive. On Pakistan, I must say, I'm not sure that Israel has to be more upfront on the Pakistani issue. From time to time, we do make comments or respond to questions publicly, and I can give you a couple of examples. Of course, we are following the endless issue of the November 26, 2008 bombings in Mumbai, of course, which included the Jewish center, but included so many other targets that were hit and hundreds of people killed. And we are following, or we were following the murder of an American-Israeli journalist, Daniel Pearl, in Pakistan. But I must say that we feel that it's better not to be or to get involved into this issue, which is a global threat by all means, and we do appreciate it and we do address it, but it's not something that we should be doing or Israel should be doing publicly. We don't have to open a new, how should I say, a new angle or a new arena. We have seen, this I can say not as an ex-diplomat, but as a citizen of Israel, we have seen in some instances reactions that go beyond all proportions when someone in Israel said something about Pakistan. There's really no need to open that door. And on the Israeli-Indian relations, they are strong, they are comprehensive, they include also anti-terrorism. We have an agreement on homeland security and anti-terrorism dating from before 2014. We are doing fine on our defense cooperation, and I would leave it at that. Should I answer on the second question?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
I2U2 partnership, which is relatively new, and I think that still it is still being built. I would look at it more as a positive partnership rather than as done to confront any others. I think that looking at it that way is much more relevant and rational. And if at the end of the day you would have indirect influence on others, that's fine. But this should not be our focus. The focus is economic. The focus is to look at how each of the four sides bring their own comparative advantages, either financial or professional. India has a lot to bring to this partnership. Israel has a couple of things to bring as its own experience as a developing that became developed country. We can all bring to the table what we can bring, looking positively at how to really address what I called before the developmental challenges, excuse me, the economic results that can be brought, helping the four sides, but also going beyond those four partners. One comment that is not related directly to the question, but before you mentioned India as a developing country, I think that when we talk about a changing world, we might also talk about a changing narrative. And I'm not sure that the original definitions of developing and developed are still right nowadays with the changing world. And India, which is by the Bank of World Bank, is not, if I'm not mistaken, not in the group of developing countries, but not in the developed countries yet, is definitely acting in some angles as a developed country because it is helping others. The number of people who get capacity building from India, in India, the students that India brings from so many countries puts India in a totally different place than a developing country. So yes, it has development challenges within, but yes, it is also acting as a developed country, and this is something we should appreciate it. And I'm sorry that I went beyond the question, but I think it was important for me to make this comment.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Carmon, for your comments. I think they always add value. So now we are exactly at 11:30. So the only thing left for me is to thank our speakers, the two speakers who are currently with us, and Dr. Dorsey, who has left us because of certain other preoccupations. Thank also the organizers. I think the last comment that I could possibly make is that India is a country that belongs to the global south without getting into the differentiation between developing or developed or emerging or other economies. It's a country that belongs to the global south. We had, even without being a member of the UN Security Council or elsewhere, I think India was one of the countries that made the maximum contribution in terms of sharing its vaccines with the developing world. As I said, close to 300 million, and particularly in areas like Africa and Latin America, where these vaccines were not, had not reached, they had not been able to access it. Also recently organizing, getting 125 countries on the same platform to get the voice of the global south integrated into the G20 discussions, because G20 might contribute about 85% to the global trade, 75% to global GDP, etc., etc. But unless the 180 other countries are also their concerns, their anxieties, their ambitions, their aspirations also taken on board, the global system, whether it's economic or political or security and peace, it will not be viable. So India has been taking such measures, whether it holds any definitive position on global platforms or not. India is a country, I think, that straddles across both developing and developed. It is, as we are talking, fifth largest economy, the fastest growing major economy in the world. And of course, going to be also coming in the first, maybe the third largest economy in nominal dollar terms also very soon. And in addition to that, of course, even in terms of its relations, it straddles across. I'm sure people would remember whether it was the G20 in 2019 in Osaka. India had, I think India was the only country we had meeting of the RIC, Russia, India, China, and also simultaneously a meeting of the what Prime Minister Modi called it the Japan, America, India, which he termed as a success. And the same meetings, similar meetings took place also on the sidelines of the of the 2018 G20 summit in Buenos Aires. So India straddles across different platforms and is equally comfortable. Someone mentioned about Quad and the SCO. So that also India is able to handle its presence in different on different platforms very effectively. So with these few words, let me once again thank our speakers, thank also the audience and the questions that have been posed. And of course, most of all, thank the organizers, Usanas and Abhinav Pandya for bringing us all together on this platform. The floor is over to you, Abhinav. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Definitely. It was a delight listening to such fine and refined thoughts explaining the complexities of the emerging world order and also what are the expectations from India and what are the global perspectives on how India is acting and how India should be dealing with. It was indeed a great learning experience for all of us young IR buffs and scholars, okay, enthusiasts rather, I should say. So yes, and I want to just mention. I guess I mentioned in the beginning, but here for this conference, the Ministry of External Affairs is a co-host in this conference, and so it is like Usanas Foundation and the Ministry of External Affairs. So this is the first part, this is the online part, and the offline part will be in Udaipur in the month of March, from 23rd March to 25th March.